You've got questions about Stargate, and hopefully I have some answers. It's been a long time since we've done a Q&A video like this, but they're so much fun. I want to get back into doing them on the regular. I've taken these questions from the last video that we did, which was a couple of years ago now. So if you've got a question and it's not answered here, well, we've done this a couple times before. You can go watch those videos next, but then post your questions below. We're gonna take the best and the brightest and hopefully do this again and again and again. There's always new people coming on to Stargate. Let's see what you guys are asking. Dries Dupreez asks, I've wondered about where the next canon Stargate could go, and I'm not afraid of a bold move. What do you think of a show that picks up where we left off with the Destiny, not as a show premise, but just an entry point back in, with a much older and thinner Eli watching over the ship and crew? I'm a sucker for continuity with what's come before, as I said in a recent video. Whatever the new show is, when it gets announced, I would love to see something that has continuity with the existing canon. So the last thing that we saw in Stargate when SGU went off the air in 2011 was Eli Wallace, the only one not in a stasis pod. And hey, have you seen David Blue lately? We've got an interview with him coming up, actually. David is fit and trim, he looks great, and he still loves Stargate. It would be a brilliant idea, I think, to start with some resolution, right? It doesn't have to be an entire show, it doesn't even have to be an entire episode, but some resolution to the fact that the crew was lost out there. Now, I don't think that we're going to get the payoff to Brad's story for Destiny, what its grand mission was, what's the secret at the heart of the universe. I don't think we're going to get that in the new show, certainly not in kind of cast-off dialogue, where Eli shows up and says, oh, we found the mysteries of the universe. This is what it was. No, but I'd love to see David Blue and others from SGU back, again, as an entry point for the audience. That'd be fantastic. Sergeant Riffen asks, why did the Tok'ra disappear from the series? I think you mean sometime between the fall of Anubis and the arrival of the Ori. And are Tok'ra allowed to make a Harcesis? This is an interesting couple of questions. You will notice as you watch through the show that there's much less Tok'ra in the final 2 seasons. That's the Ori storyline. I think that the reason is, well, they're not getting immediately involved in another galactic war. I mean, you can wag your finger at the Tok'ra for not helping out with the fight against the Ori. But the Ori are conquering planets, and the Tok'ra don't have one. The Tok'ra are scattered. At the end of the war against the System Lords, they're trying to figure out how to build a new society. That society, of course, we're eventually going to see in Stargate Continuum. We see they do have a new homeworld, and they have this big, fantastic, beautiful city, but it took them a couple of years to build it. I think they were probably just trying to stay out of the fight so that they could make their new homeworld. As for whether the Tok'ra could make a Harcesis, they probably could. I don't see any reason why. I mean, when a mama Tok'ra and a daddy Tok'ra love each other very much, but I'm not sure why they would. The idea of 2 Tok'ra passing on their genetic memory, even if it's quote-unquote good genetic memory from Egeria, the founder of the Tok'ra, passing on that genetic memory to a human being might still be a little risky. There might be unforeseen consequences. But come back in the comments and tell me what you think. Should we get Tok'ra Harcesis? Does that make sense for them to maybe help solve their problem with not having enough hosts? Richard Bilton. In the original Stargate film, a 7 chevron address sends the team across the universe to Abydos in another galaxy. What were 8 and 9 chevron addresses intended for in that storyline? We actually do have an answer for this one. The original Stargate writer and producer Dean Devlin made an appearance on Dial the Gate a couple of years ago, and he talked about the original idea for the trilogy that he wanted to make with director Roland Emmerich. The idea was the 7th chevron goes to Abydos specifically, the 8th chevron address goes to another planet, and the 9 chevron address goes to a third planet. So it wasn't this, what the TV series picked up on was that a different combination of symbols can go to thousands of different planets. But no, the 7th, 8th, and 9th chevrons were specifically used to go to 3 specific places. And that was going to be the premise, the setup for the 3 movies. Honestly, I like the way the show did it better. Here's another one from Richard. Why does a gate appear to start dialing when there's an incoming wormhole? Does it show the address of the gate that is dialing? No, I don't think there's any indication that if you stop and watch what symbols are being locked, that it's the address of the gate that's dialing into you. The show is honestly pretty inconsistent here in terms of what causes a Stargate to start dialing. So we'll get things like Walter receiving a radio transmission from an off-world team before the wormhole has connected. Those sorts of inconsistencies are kind of woven into, especially the first couple seasons of the show. Really, if you think about it, if you dial a 7 chevron address, then the receiving gate doesn't know that it's being dialed until you've at least hit symbol number 6, right? So you hit symbol number 6, that sets your target. The 7th symbol is the point of origin. So a receiving gate in theory, shouldn't start spinning, shouldn't know that it's being dialed until you reach the 6th symbol. I don't think there's a good explanation for this, at least not one that came from inside the show. If you really push the logic of dialing a Stargate, this is going to be a little inconsistent. Anita W. asks a good question. Why are the published Stargate novels not accepted as canon to the televised shows? This is going to differ, of course, from one franchise to the next. There are certain Star Wars novels that were originally, of course, part of George Lucas's canon, that were then set aside as legacy when Disney bought Star Wars. But on the Star Trek side, well, Gene Roddenberry was always very specific that what it counts as canon, right, as official to the universe, is only what has appeared on screen in live action. Stargate more or less follows the same rule, and we're following here the lead of MGM, MGM's Consumer Products division, which I've had some conversations with over the years, and series co-creator Brad Wright. The team that made the live action shows was not involved, for example, in Stargate Infinity, the animated series. That was more of a licensed tie-in like the novels or the comics. So the novels and comics, they go to MGM Consumer Products and they get reviewed and they get approved, right? This sounds like Jack O'Neill. This is consistent with the Stargate brand, but they're not validated as part of Stargate's official canon. And the simple reason is a straightforward business decision. You don't want to hamstring current or future writers to have to know about everything that went on in the novels, right? Just look at how many novels there are for Star Trek, let alone for Stargate. Fandemonium has published dozens of novels at this point. We've got various series of comics, etc. There's RPGs, there's video games. The idea is to leave the creators as free as possible to tell the story that they want to tell. So that's why the tie-in media in Stargate is not canon. And I've got that officially from MGM Consumer Products. They don't regard it as canon unless the writers of the show want to take one of those ideas and pull it into live action. While we're on the subject, let me plug here the Stargate Omnipedia, which is at gateworld.net, or you can also get to it by going to stargateomnipedia.com. What we've done in the Omnipedia is created a wiki that is strictly canon. Other wikis on the internet you'll find pull in material from the novels, from the comics, etc. And they create something that is what I would call beta canon, right? That's kind of a Star Trek term, a memory alpha term from Star Trek. A beta canon includes all the tie-in material, but it's not official. So I would encourage you to reference the Stargate Omnipedia if you're looking for information that is strictly from the canon episodes and films. It can't all be canon, and if you want an example of that, look at the Back to Pegasus comics and the Stargate Atlantis Legacy novels. Both of those told very different versions of an Atlantis continuation, a sort of virtual season 6. Both of them picked up where the TV show left off, with Atlantis returning to Pegasus, but they did it in totally different ways. They can't both be canon. Sal L. asks, why in the ancient databases is the Egypt gate point of origin used instead of the Antarctica gate point of origin? Also to dial Destiny, the same Egypt point of origin is used. Wasn't the Egypt gate brought by Ra? The short answer is I suspect you're right that this is a continuity error. We know that the original Stargate on Earth was the one that the ancients left there when they went to Pegasus millions of years ago that ended up buried in the ice of Antarctica. The characters in the show speculate that the gate that we know and love, the one that was found in Egypt, the one that has the triangle or the sun rising over the pyramid as its point of origin, was brought to Earth later by Ra. Ra had found Earth using his ship and decided to put a Stargate there so that he could access it, right? Take the people through the gate to other planets as slaves. He didn't know that there was already a Stargate hidden in Antarctica. Now, if we work hard enough, we can maybe retcon this a little bit. And the show actually gives us license to do so. Let me explain what I mean. We know that the Antarctic gate has a different symbol on it. In Solitudes, it was the one that Carter was trying to use as the point of origin because it was the only symbol she didn't recognize. It was unique to that gate as far as she knew, so she was trying to use it as the seventh symbol and it wasn't working. Not necessarily because it wasn't the seventh symbol, but because she was trying to dial Earth, right? You can't dial your own phone number. You can't dial from Earth to Earth. But here's the thing. We don't know that the pyramid with the sun rising overhead, that symbol is not on that gate. And when that gate later gets installed in Stargate Command, well, production used their existing shots of the gate dialing and of that symbol locking, even though the gate was different. So I'm going to speculate that the Beta Gate, the Antarctic Gate, actually does have that symbol on it, and it functions as the point of origin. Possibly because when Ra thought he was putting a new gate on a planet, that updated the Stargate network through the correlative update process to use that gate and its seventh symbol, and that sort of stayed in the buffer, right? It stayed in the memory for the Stargate network, so that when the Antarctic gate is put in its place, that same symbol that it has still functions as the point of origin for Earth. Bit of a stretch maybe, but that's my headcanon. Here's a question from Alan Harper. Why was Midway never rebuilt? It's destroyed due to the Wraith incursion, but the gate bridge itself was left intact. One might assume that the risk of enemies accessing the bridge, as the Wraith did, would be too great, but that risk could be seriously minimized. So there's the production reason and there's the canon reason, right? In universe. In terms of production, I think that the Midway station was destroyed just because it was a little too convenient. It was a way to deal our heroes a setback, to make it harder to reach Earth, make them a little more isolated again. In universe, on the other hand, I think that there would have been plans to rebuild Midway eventually. Certainly with more security precautions like you're suggesting. Maybe a station without an atmosphere that you can't travel by foot. You have to take a ship through. The show only ran for a little bit more than a year after Midway was destroyed, so I think it's entirely possible that there were plans on the drawing board. But of course that takes money and it takes a commitment of resources, and if the show had run a couple more years, we might have seen a Midway 2.0. Cyclonus asks, when Egeria died, why didn't a Tok'ra take over the role as queen? I think you know a lot more about the insect kingdom than I do, but I'm just going to speculate a little bit with respect to Stargate and the Tok'ra. There's a sense in the Stargate universe that queens are actually very, very rare. And of course, a queen like Egeria, whose heart is not bent toward evil, but who opposes the system lords and passes that along to her offspring through genetic memory. I can't imagine another queen like that being discovered. So why can't another Tok'ra become a queen? I think that queens are biologically different. I don't know that they could deliberately set about to nurse a new queen, even from a larval stage, to grow and evolve into a queen. I think they're just biologically different and super rare. So the fact that Egeria was so different from every other Goa'uld created a kind of pocket group of Tok'ra who, once she was gone, there's a law of diminishing returns there. There's only going to be so many Tok'ra. TH Dev asks, if the ancients had developed the Telchak device well before leaving for Pegasus, why didn't they use it to heal the plague? Considering the device was the inspiration for the sarcophagus, would it not have solved the majority of their issues going forward? This is a really good lore question about the ancients. I think you're onto something, but there's a couple of, not necessarily flaws, but there's a couple of things that make this problematic. First of all, we don't know when Telchak's device was created. And that's because the ancient timeline, it's a little bit wonky. Millions of years ago, they seem to have been suffering from the plague. That left Iona behind when the ancients moved to the Pegasus galaxy. But then 10,000 years ago, the Lantean survivors of the Wraith War came back to Earth and apparently spread throughout the Milky Way galaxy again. So we don't know. Telchak's device might be millions and millions of years old. It might have been created before they left, or it might be relatively young. It might have been made by an ancient scientist after they came back. The other issue here, of course, is we know that the plague, at least millions of years ago, when they were suffering from it, the plague was beyond the ancients' ability to solve. So even if Telchak's device is millions of years old, it wouldn't necessarily be able to heal them of that plague. When Jack O'Neill was infected with the same virus in the episode Frozen, I think they couldn't just go and find a sarcophagus and put him in it. The only way to heal that plague, as far as we know, is either Ayana's super evolved healing abilities or the healing powers of a symbiote. That's, of course, what ultimately saves Jack's life, is he gets a Tok'ra symbiote, and the symbiote is able to combat that virus. Telchak's device and the sarcophagus that is developed from that technology, I suspect is not capable of defeating the plague. Okay, here's a good Stargate physics question. I've been waiting for this. Netanaluz asks, I'm curious to know what would happen if, after arriving at a destination through a wormhole, someone put, say, a hand or threw a rock into the still open wormhole. Would it disintegrate? In Shades of Grey, we see O'Neill still holding his hand in the event horizon after coming out the other side, but it's not shown if he put his hand back into the wormhole after exiting, or if he just never pulled it out all the way. You've got this exactly right, and it's the same sort of question as, can you walk backwards through an open wormhole? Well, the show has established that wormhole travel is one way. You can't walk backwards through an open wormhole. So what would happen if you tried? What happened if you tried to push past the event horizon of an incoming wormhole? I am not of the school of thought that says the wormhole would instantly vaporize you, that the event horizon would just scatter your particles. That would be a pretty dangerous technology for the ancients to leave lying around on thousands of planets. I think probably it's just going to be hard, right? It's going to push back against you. It's like walking into a giant, not physically hard. It's like walking into a giant marshmallow. You're only going to be able to push so far before it pushes back. So if you turn around and throw a rock into an open wormhole, I think it's not going to go anywhere. It's just going to fall back onto the ground. As for Jack in Shades of Grey, he tells the rogue NID agents that he's going to be holding the door open so they can't shut down the gate and go somewhere else. So I think what happens here is that as he exits from the Stargate, he's going to keep his arm in the wormhole. He keeps his arm from emerging out. And so the Stargate knows that he has not fully exited, and it's not going to let them shut it down on the other side because there's still a person in transit. Ryan B. asks, is it known what parts of the sets still remain usable? I can't imagine MGM keeping SGC, Atlantis, or Destiny's main sets in ready-to-shoot states. I vaguely recall hearing that the original SGC gate that spun was dismantled. There was a short period of time after SG-1 and the movies ended where the sets stayed up at the Bridge Studios in Vancouver. MGM actually paid a lot out of pocket to keep those sets standing, hoping that they were going to make another SG-1 movie. The original gate room from Stargate Command was repurposed for the SGU pilot for the Icarus base. But after that, in 2009, that set was struck, as well as Stargate Atlantis, when it became clear that they were not going to get to make the movie that they wanted to make. MGM went bankrupt by the end of 2010. Those sets were struck. Destiny as well, a couple of years later. That stuff is all gone. That stuff has been sold off. As far as I know, MGM isn't holding on to any of it anymore. There was a series of auctions several years ago where those pieces were sold off, right? Tons of props, tons of wardrobe, and the Stargates themselves were chopped up into pieces and sold in segments. You can still find these online every now and again. You can find pictures because there are fans out there who own pieces of the original Stargates. As far as I know, Stargate SG-1's location gate, the one that did not spin physically, remained whole and was purchased. I think it's owned by the Mopop Museum in Seattle, but as far as I know, it's not currently on display. Michael Davies asks, If a new series continues on from previous shows, how powerful will the Tari be by this point? Access to goa'uld tech, the complete scientific and technological advancements of the Asgard? Atlantis itself, and having a good look at Ori technology, with possible help of the now turned priors. And a decade to study all of this and develop new tech based on it. Would the Tari basically be as powerful as Time Lords by now? I think so, and I think this is a real hindrance to just a straight-on continuation of a new series that just picks up in Stargate Command as it stood with these years and years of technological advancement. Earth is basically no longer a sort of present-day reality. All this technology, all right, these battleships, the knowledge of the Asgard civilization, all of this has been implemented over the course of 15 or 20 years. I think it would look like a very different sort of Earth. That, for my money, is a pretty good reason to do not a hard reboot, but a soft reboot that kind of takes Earth's advancements off the table, or you do something that deals Earth a setback, some failure to access the database, some new enemy that's destroyed Earth's fleet, that sort of thing, that deals a setback so that you can have conflict and challenge in the new stories that you want to tell. Gamer Girl asks, my question is about when the SGC used to shake each time the Stargate opened from the other side. Did the SGC come up with a technology to stop the facility from shaking, or does it still shake, but the writers just decided to stop showing it? This is one of those fragments from season 1, right? The first time that the Stargate is dialed in the movie, the whole base shakes violently. And they continued that a little ways into the TV series. But yeah, there is an in-canon explanation that we do get in dialogue. In the episode Solitudes, Daniel and General Hammond talk about installing frequency dampeners to stop the shake. So, right, you know, the Stargate has those clamps all around it in the SGC that hold it in place, that connect it to the base's power systems. I just picture somewhere underneath there, right, probably underneath the ramp, there are frequency dampeners. There's shock absorbers to help with the bouncing. So technically connecting the Stargate does cause the Stargate to shake a little bit, but we don't see it on screen anymore because of the frequency dampeners. Similar thing with traveling through the wormhole. It used to be a rough ride. People used to come out with their molecules compressed, right? So they're frosted, covered with ice on their face, and they'd get spat out the other side of the Stargate. We saw that in the movie. We saw that in Children of the Gods. It goes away, and in Season 5's Red Sky, Carter explains that it was caused by sort of misaligning our calculations for stellar drift. Once they got the computer program right to calculate the address that you're dialing, just right, just accurate, then it causes the Stargate to function the way that it's supposed to, which is a nice smooth ride. Brandon Brown says, in episode 200 in season 10, Grell / Douglas Anders / Herbert Duncanson, the actor, has that iconic quote, and it stuck with me for years. Who was responsible for adding that to the script?
Science fiction is an existential metaphor. It allows us to tell stories about the human condition. Isaac Asimov once said, individual science fiction stories may seem as trivial as ever to the blinder critics and philosophers of today. But the core of science fiction, its essence, has become crucial to our salvation, if we are to be saved at all.
I think this one is 100% Brad Wright, the co-creator of Stargate SG-1, who is, of course, steeped in classic science fiction and a big fan of Isaac Asimov. It's such a great quote, and it encapsulates so well what Stargate SG-1 was about and what good science fiction is about. Frager Hoskin asks, how come in Stargate Atlantis, when they encountered the Replicators, everybody was acting like they had amnesia? Hadn't SG-1 already figured out how to beat them? The Replicators shouldn't have been resistant to that technology because they should have been older in the Pegasus galaxy than the Replicators in the Milky Way. This is interesting. A couple of points here. Yes, the Pegasus Replicators are much, much older, created by the Ancients in the course of their war with the Wraith more than 10,000 years ago. But remember, Replicators didn't sort of step through the Stargate into the Milky Way galaxy in their final boss form. We think that they evolved from Reese's toys. So they were sort of recreated in the Milky Way galaxy. and eventually, only thanks to the Asgard time dilation device in the episode Prometheus, only eventually did they evolve into a human nanite form again. So because the Pegasus replicators have been around for more than 10,000 years, I think they're just that much more evolved and technologically sophisticated. The same basic idea from SG-1 does end up working on them, which is disrupting the bonds that hold their nanites together. That's basically the technology that was discovered on Tok'ra in the episode Reckoning, that led to the big wave through the Stargate that made all the blocks fall apart. End of replicators in the Milky Way. In Pegasus, well, they don't have access to Tok'ra, they don't have access immediately to that technology, but we see eventually by mid-season 3 or so, Earth has developed ARGs, anti-replicator guns, which operate on the same premise. They shoot an energy wave that is meant to be tuned to the replicator nanites and disrupt the bonds that hold them together. So here I'll give credit to the writers. I think they did go back and look at SG-1 and had the characters understand the way the replicators work and adapt that technology to create a weapon. It just took a while. And of course, the replicators proved very resilient and were able to some degree, counteract that. Last question comes from Fisher2000. We see in the movies/TV show that the Ori have their own version of the ring technology, but it is never explained or shown how they have come into possession of Stargate technology. Do you think the Ori galaxy has a network of gates in them for the different worlds that we see? This is something that the Ori story arc leaves kind of frustratingly vague. We see different villages, Veregger, Veriska, that look really similar to each other, but we're not actually certain if they're on different planets. They might actually be villages on a single planet. We're not sure that the Ori spread out and created human civilizations throughout their whole galaxy and then connected those planets with a gate network. We just don't know. We don't have enough information. We do know that the Ori seem to have more or less the same technological advancements as the Ancients. As you say, they have ring transporters, and we know from the show that the ring transporter works on the same premise as the Stargate, only over shorter distances. So if they have rings, yeah, I think they probably have Stargates. And in my head, they're really cool Stargates. They have that sort of curved edge with the inscripted runes like their transport rings do. Those Stargates would look rad. But there's some conjecture here. We know that the Ori have to have Stargates of some kind, at least on a homeworld, because the priors come through the Stargate to the Milky Way galaxy in Season 9. And then here's the image that I always point people to. This is a fresco that appeared in Adria's chamber in Stargate: The Ark of Truth. It shows an army of Ori followers standing in front of a Stargate. The Stargate more or less looks like a Milky Way gate with the reddish-orange chevrons, but you can't really see it all that clearly. I do think this is really strong evidence that there are Stargates in the Ori home galaxy, and they probably used them. Thanks everybody for your great questions. If you didn't see your question answered here, we've done a couple of these before. Just click on this video to see our previous Q&A video, where we talk about things like the Ancients, about Stargate travel, going backwards through a wormhole, stepping through the back of a Stargate. Otherwise, post your questions down below and I'll look through them and pull out a few more for the next time we do one of these Q&A videos. If you like this format, you want to see more videos like this one, and you want to help support the channel, go ahead and hit the like button and make sure you're subscribed. Thanks so much for watching.